Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this roundtable that it is part of all the activities that have been organized by the Office of the High Commissioner to mark the day. As you all know, we had very exciting day yesterday already with a very interesting display of what we do and how we do it, and it was, I understand, well attended, and people were very much interested in what we were presenting. I'm not going, today is not my day. I'm just welcoming you. And I'm going to hand it over very quickly to my colleague Vic, who is going to help us through the conversation today. I want to also welcome colleagues that are joining us online. I believe more people will join us as we go, but since all our panelists and guests are already here, we should get it started. Let me thank everybody for making yourselves available, panelists and guests. Many of you very big supporters of the work that the Human Rights Inquiries branch does. But today the conversation is not just about the branch in the Office of the High Commissioner, is how do we innovate in how we conduct investigations and therefore contributing to accountability. Um, Thanks again to the panelists, but I do invite everybody to make very good use of this opportunity later on to actively engage and participate and share your experiences. And with that, thank you so much. Welcome once again. And Vic, you take it from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. And good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to join us in this panel on human rights investigations, and in particular, innovation in the field of human rights investigation. As Beatrice said, I'm Vic Ullum. I'm a member of the specialist branch of or specialist section of the Human Rights Inquiries branch, and I'll be moderating the session today. It's very much an honor because we really have quite a high caliber panel that's joined us today, volunteering their time to talk about the innovations that they have in their own human rights investigative space. I just want to say a couple of words before we start out with panelists about why this session is going in the direction it is, which is about innovation in the space of human rights investigations. And in the broader picture of Rights X Summit, which is largely focused on the digital aspects of human rights work writ large, we recognize that there's myriad challenges facing human rights investigations. And with the advent, the very obvious increase in the digital and tech space impacting on human rights investigations, there's I think a temptation for us to view human rights investigations as really taking a lot of digital and tech space. But I think it's important also to recognize that it's a very human endeavor. The victims, even the perpetrators, and the human rights investigators are human beings. And so we are in that space, but we also want to be able to join up with the digital tech space and see if we can figure out ways to work together in that. And I think that what you hear from the panelists today will be innovations on the tech side, innovations on the human side, and hopefully together in the session afterwards, that intersection between the human and the tech side. Not to suggest in any way that those are juxtaposed positions, but that we should work on integrating. So just to say, with each speaker, I'm not going to leave out their bios. You have them on the website, and it would take far too long given the extensive experience that they each have. But I will say that we don't really want to do a Q&A after each individual speaker. We'll save that to a space at the end, tempting as it might be to try to engage, but just note down your questions. And people online, we have Anna Caloris looking at the chat. So if you have a question or comment that you would like to include, please feel free to do so in the chat. Also, that the session is being recorded. So you'll have an opportunity to. Anna, is it being recorded?
It's disabled, so it's the Q&A.
The Q&A. Sorry, not the chat, the Q&A.
For the questions, they can ask questions, and I can read aloud.
Oh, okay, sure. So, but not the chat.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. So, colleagues joining online, it's in the Q&A part of your screen, not the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn over to our first speaker. Seppi Calandruccio is the coordinator of the ongoing Commission of Inquiry on the OPT, and including East Jerusalem and Israel. So, Seppi, first floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vic, and good morning, everybody. I think one of the main elements that today is quite evident is that there is a proliferation of investigative mechanisms that have been established. I don't think that there have been so many as today, but at least in what concerns the situation where I am involved, I took the time to look back and try to make, if not an history, at least to see what has happened and in the past. And surprisingly, I found out that the first commission of inquiry, the first body established, goes back to 1919. And at that moment, obviously, it was not a human rights investigation. It's not even a body mandated by a multilateral organism, where before the foundation, the League of Nations. But it is interesting to see that it's not new. It's not a new tool for multilateralism, for international relations. The League of Nations actually establishes the first commission in 1937, the Peel Commission, which is ante litteram a commission that looks at the issue of self-determination. Then obviously there is the establishment of the United Nations, the Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and these tools continue to be used by the different organs of the United Nations. There are many that have been established by the Security Council, for instance. And here, if you allow me a parenthesis, there is one body, one investigative body which has been established by the Security Council, which was the commission, the fact-finding mission for Darfur in 2004. And I am really puzzled by the fact that seeing the outcomes of that work in 2004, today, with the number of convictions and sentences being passed by the ICC, is not sufficiently spread by the media, but also by us, by those mechanisms who should strive for accountability. And I think, if not mistaken, even in this room, there are people who have worked in this specific case. So just to say, just to make a plea to the fact that despite the criticism levied against the United Nations, the multilateral system, there are actually successes that we should treasure and we should use to make sure that the same can happen in other situations. Going back to my country situation, I have started being involved in investigations mandated by the Human Rights Council in 2006, when the Council established a first mechanism. And one of the main issues then was access, because obviously the country concerned denied access. And at that time, what happened was that we were waiting, empty-handed. We were basically going back to our previous jobs, so waiting that something might happen. Surprisingly, at that time, something happened, and we were given access, and the commission and the fact-finding mission was allowed to do its work. I participated yet in another investigation when access was not granted, but we were told that we will be tolerated, so the work could also continue. And then I yet again participated in another investigation where access was not granted at all. We were told very clearly that that will never happen. As a matter of fact, even before my first experience, there was another investigation mandated by the Human Rights Council, which has been denied access, and that investigation simply didn't happen and died in silence. Now, the fact that access was not granted, that was not something peculiar to that particular situation. It started becoming the norm, and countries would routinely deny access to investigative mechanisms. What to do? How do we face this situation? Well, what happened is that depending on the personality and the spirit of the chair of the body of the fact-finding mission, a desire not to accept the situation started emerging, and the decision taken, not just in the investigative mechanism where I participated, but in other mechanisms, was we go on despite the denial of access. How do we do that? How do we go about that? How do we innovate? At that point, the innovation was we try to go to third countries, we meet people in other contexts, we reach out to them remotely, and this is when technological innovation had to come in, and it came in not because of a decision, but it came in because this was the situation. We had to use those means. I want to make just a small example, and going back to my current experience, 7th of October, something is happening, something is big is happening. We don't know what is happening, but we know it is happening. What do we do? At that point, the decision in our team was we start gather everything. We gather everything possible. We think about it later. And it was thinking of it now, it was the right decision because then we could start analyzing the information, looking at what was genuine, what was not genuine. Innovation is something that happens because our environment changes around us. It's not necessarily a decision that you can take cold blood, let's say. And today, I think that it is, at least for us, unthinkable to plan, implement any investigation without using satellite imagery, face recognition, without using all the means that are at disposal. We are not the only ones, because not just other commission of inquiries, but the environment around us has turned into that, including NGOs, including the media. So this is just to say, we might be very proud of the innovation that we put in place, but in reality, is the adaptation to the reality of our century, the globalization, and we need to follow up. We need to use those means and continue strive for accountability and the implementation of the mandate that have been entrusted to us. Thank you, Vic.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent start to the day. Appreciate it very much. The historical perspective, which I'm not sure very many people in the room would be aware of, but I appreciate you situating it there. And then the being triggered by events and sort of welcoming innovation, but also somehow being forced on you, and that without it, you wouldn't be able to go forward. So thank you very, very much for that. Our next speaker on the list, Alex Eljundi, is the chief of the investigation support section within the Human Rights and Compliance branch. Alex, welcome to go next.
Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for attending. I'm head of the investigation support section, and we provide the operational support to all the investigations either mandated by the Human Rights Council or launched under the High Commissioner's global mandate, which say human rights investigations, as opposed to the independent investigative mechanisms such as Syria and Myanmar. So our role is one, operational support. We also provide search support, and we act as standby capacity, investigative capacity on behalf of the High Commissioner. Now, that said, it's a bit difficult to talk about the investigation support section and our innovation as in a silo. Part of the innovation of the creation of the branch was to ensure that it was fast moving and operating as one. So I have colleagues from the other two substantive sections who are going to talk, Sun and Ilyong, from their side of what we do. But we very much work closely together, and that was part of the thinking when we designed the branch, that we would not have three separate sections, but we would have three substantive areas of support. In addition, the admin support, which has been absolutely crucial at the moment when it comes to the liquidity crisis and support from that aspect, but working together as one. So colleagues will forgive me if I touch a bit upon their work, and I know they will also sort of complement as well as we go into it. But the point being that that's part of the innovation of this branch. The High Commissioner, when he launched the 2.0, he very much said, think outside the box. And the two first areas which were implemented was the Innovation Hub, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about, and the Human Rights Inquiries Branch. And his direction was very much think outside the box. I want something that's fit for purpose, that responds to the needs of the office, investigations, and accountability worldwide in the 21st century. So it was very much designed in that respect. The other one is, as Giuseppe said, we very much respond to the current situation. And we're quite unique, I would say, in terms of our specialist support and what we provide, and very much from the beginning, bringing on board support which had not traditionally been part of, let's say, OECHR's toolkit. So traditionally with investigations, the commission inquiries, the way they've worked is the office was mandated to support an investigation which looked at the very specific incident, issued a report, and then archived the information, and this was preserved on behalf of the High Commissioner. Today, for a number of factors, we very much have comprehensive mandates, as well as the reality of the way modern human rights violations and abuses and international crimes are recorded in the digital sphere. So very much, in addition to human rights experts, investigators, bringing on board, for example, legal expertise, including in international criminal law, including gender expertise in every single investigation we support, as well as in the branch to coordinate this, child rights, but adding forensic pathology, adding victim witness protection, looking now towards forensic accountancy, business human rights, economic crimes, to name a few. So adding those layers there. And then in addition to this, and Young will touch upon this, the digital forensics expertise, which covers a whole digital architecture necessary for the collection and preservation of information and evidence with a view to maximizing its use in accountability processes down the line. The other area of innovation is very much thinking about partnerships and strengthening, we're not operating in a silo, so strengthening our partnerships, both with the other accountability mechanisms that exist within the UN system, with our partners with NGOs and CSOs. And in this respect, I see JRR is on the panel, and we have Sam here as well. That really is sort of our template partnership that we have in terms of working with them to ensure that we have seconded expertise in terms of child rights, gender, but more broadly as well. Should also mention UN Women as part of that core requirement. We're also looking to partner with other bodies as well, Physician for Human Rights, to really bring in the medical expertise that modern investigations require, as well as another of other partnerships. So very much thinking outside the box and adding those layers with the view to ensuring that our investigations very much the findings, the information, the evidence collected are very, very much comprehensive and can support accountability mechanisms, in addition to the traditional requirements of issuing reports and ensuring that we have an archive that can be used both for truth-telling, giving a voice to the victims, but as well as supporting accountability in the future. And just there, one example of that is the Bangladesh investigation, which was the first one launched by the branch at the direction of the High Commissioner, and the issuance of a report where we very much use a full toolkit of specialist expertise. But maybe even more importantly, that the Bangladeshi government has declared that report and that archive part of the historical record of Bangladesh. So it's also given a voice to the victim, and we hope will support future accountability processes there. Vic, I think I'll stop there. I know colleagues will complement that, but sort of just already providing framework for how the work we're doing in support investigations very much is trying to meet the requirements of the 21st century and move forward as part of the wider work on supporting accountability with our partners in the UN system, also NGOs, CSOs, and families and their victims. Thanks, Vic.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate that. I think there's this idea that all of our investigative bodies are somehow self-contained and that they can do everything. They have all the resources they need. And I think the model that branch is showing is that we can have some common services at the branch level that we can support those investigative bodies with. But even that's not enough. We need partnerships with colleagues that you mentioned. And really, so there's a lot of hands coming on deck, to pull off an investigation. So appreciate you making that point, including all the innovations that come along with it. So excellent, thank you. Fred, you are up next as Senior Information Management for Investigative Mechanisms. Please take the floor.
Thanks, Vic. Good morning, colleagues. I head up a specialist team of technologists in an investigative mechanism dealing with advanced and cutting-edge technologies. Over the last 5.5 years, we've actually spent an extensive amount of time addressing the issue that I think, by the looks of it, at least when I arrived from the private sector, seemed to be a bit of a shock factor, in that a lot of the investigators and lawyers that came across were not really too sure what to do with this new mountain of digital information that we were actually being sent, given, gifted, and stuff that sometimes we had to go and get ourselves. And that evolution, as far as innovations go, allowed us to develop something that we actually call, in our reports you'll see, called the Electronic Information Management System, which basically allows us to track all the information that we actually get from witnesses, victims, NGOs, CSOs, that sort of thing, literally from request to the sharing packs that we actually give out to the people that we actually collaborate with, that actually want to prosecute the crimes that we are gathering information on and actually making and creating analysis of. Part of that, of course, is also building in a whole bunch of efficiency, because if you build something from the ground up, what you're able to do is take a look as you evolve where those little pinch points are, where something that normally takes 6 people something to do, you take a look at whether or not you can make that more efficient, whether or not you can automate that, whether or not there's a piece of technology that you can add into the stack that will allow you to do more with less, which is what we've actually managed to do, to the extent where we are now actually talking to some other investigative bodies and accountability mechanisms to see where we can actually share that knowledge with them so that everyone can now basically benefit from what we've learned over the years. And of course, we couldn't have done that without very close collaboration with our investigators and our lawyers, where they've really, really been able to adapt and accept the technologies that we've tried to introduce to them. Because most of the time, the problem is not just a technology problem, it's a workflow problem. It's an adaptation of trying to find the melding and the balance of those two at the same time that allows you to actually drive innovation. Because a lot of it is mindset, especially when you're looking at asking people to look at the new way of doing something and a new way of accepting the new technologies. Interestingly enough, I just finished watching the debate downstairs on AI. And of course, everybody's saying, well, why can't you guys use AI to just filter through this mountain of stuff you've got? And it's, I've been in front of a lot of technology salespeople, and they really, really paint the technology as being magical. All you've got to do is take this mountain, chuck it into my platform, press a button, and there you go. You've got your report, go prosecute them. It doesn't work like that. But it is the next evolution. And I do believe that there are certain parts of AI that we can actually build into our processes to bring better intelligence, to bring better insights into how we all do what we do, because we're all dealing with the same problem. And that is that we have multiple formats of data that we need to be able to interpret and bring to the surface, because, you know, especially in the case of some war areas where we have mechanisms or we have inquiries, the amount of data that comes in at certain times is unbelievable, because everybody has a phone. Everybody gets to be able to send these either over social media or via portals that you provide that may be more secure. But everybody knows how to get data to us. That's not the problem. The problem is, what do you do with it when you've got it? And that's the evolution that we actually find ourselves going through at the moment, is how do we do this more cleverly, more intelligently? How do we give the investigators more insight into all this information that we've been sent so that we can actually create better outputs?
I suspect you'll get a question to answer that very question that you just posed during the discussion. Thank you very much. How to use AI in our investigations. It's a very, very pertinent question that we are also facing, and I really do hope it comes out in the discussion session, because it's important. Thank you very much, Fred. Michelle, thank you again for joining us. Michelle's the deputy head of the IIIM. I think most of you will already be familiar with her. And it's really a pleasure to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vic. And I think we have the PowerPoint.
Oh, yes, some slides.
Is,
Let's see. On the screen.
Well, while that's coming up, good morning, everybody. And Fred, it's particularly excellent to come after your intervention. I think you've set the stage for me extremely well, because I think, as you all know, the IIIM Syria has had a parallel challenge to the one of the IIM working on Myanmar in terms of developing new approaches to deal with the volume of digital evidence. But Fred, I think you also made the really important point about the fact that technology is not a magic solution. It's not going to be a replacement for the other aspects of the work that we need to do. And it does, I think, in all our experience, it really comes down fundamentally to being able to change processes. You mentioned workflow, and you also mentioned mindset, which is really the entry point for my intervention, because I think a lot of this is about mindset. Vic, you also in your introduction talked about not losing sight of the human factor. And so that's really what's prompted our intervention today from the IIIM, among the many topics that we could have discussed. So what I'm going to do is talk to you about an innovation that really relates to the mindset with which we do this work, that I think has opened up a whole new conversation around how we could use technology, given this mindset change, to better deliver the solutions. So as you can see on the slide, the initial point is we really often tend to equate innovation with technological developments, new digital tools, apps, AI, and that it is tempting to see it as a magical solution, but it really is about much more than that, and about then opening up new conversations for how we can use technology as a tool to further implement the mindset shift. So if we go to the next slide, I think one of the most profound innovations that I've seen in the practice of international criminal justice, and I should just say at this point as well, the IIIM, like the IIIM, is an accountability mechanism. So it's a little bit different from a classic human rights investigation body, in that our objective really has been to try to facilitate overall justice processes for Syria. So we have that big picture perspective. And what we have tried to do at the IIIM, which I think is a paradigm shift, is reorienting the design and content of criminal justice processes to better reflect the views and priorities of the affected communities. And that might sound really obvious, but it hasn't been the case historically. We have not seen victims and survivors engaged in a meaningful way to articulate their justice priorities and then have that reflected in the way that we do our investigation and prosecution related work. So there on the slide, I mean, even if you just go back to the Nuremberg era, what we saw were international actors delivering justice on behalf of affected communities, but very much based on the priorities as the victors saw them, if you like. And so we've seen in carrying out international criminal law a similar sort of through the ad hoc courts and tribunals, certainly in my experience, it's been very much priorities decided upon by justice actors, by practitioners for affected communities. Now, I think we are in a new paradigm of, we know that's not acceptable. We know these justice processes, especially if they're going to lead to building the foundations for peace, they have to reflect the affected community's priorities. But how do we do that? That is a really complex exercise and something that we've grappled with at the AAAM over the past 8 years. So if we go to the next slide, you can see a little bit about the new methodology, new workflows that we've been developing. So key, of course, was this idea of a two-way dialogue with the affected communities. But that's a really sophisticated, multifaceted, nuanced process with many layers, including in-person convenings, online focus groups, written updates. We've had proactive efforts to try and reach more marginalised communities, building on what Alex was saying about the integration of gender, children and young people, marginalised groups who historically have been silenced and quite invisible in justice processes, needing really proactive efforts. It's not something we can assume will just happen in the course of justice if we don't pay attention to it. We've then been trying to, throughout all of these consultations, extract the operational insights from what we're hearing from the affected communities and feeding that back into the way we are designing our work and priorities at the AAIM. So if you go into the next slide, just to give you a bit of an idea about how complex this process is, we heard so much over the course of the last 8 years from so many different groups of victims and survivors on everything from the terminology that we use in our work. I mean, a very sort of basic example, when we were speaking to Yazidi victims and survivors, they raised the issue that everyone keeps using the term Yazidi, but for them, Yazidi is a really important way of referring to their own community that means something to them that the terminology Yazidi doesn't evoke. So if you're having a discussion with an affected community, and as international actors, you're not even taking the time to understand how do they want to be called, how do they want to be referred to, you can understand how much it undermines processes. Things like in the Syrian context, the purpose behind the crimes that we've seen in Syria, how do you describe that in a way that resonates with the victims and survivors who've experienced it? So we had some really important lessons around the Syrian prison system and how do people who've been through that system feel in terms of what that system was designed to do. So we've tried to reflect that in the way that we're really explaining the crimes. We could have just called it torture or even persecution, but for them it was really about the strategic use of a whole prison system in order to repress the population. Of course, we have to make sure that the evidence aligns with what we're hearing from victims and survivors, but when it does, we should really try to deliver it in the shape that they want. We heard a lot about the types of harms that are most important, and especially in light of the gaps that we were seeing in justice processes. So things like enforced disappearance, which hadn't been addressed in some of the universal jurisdiction cases, the importance of addressing psychological torture, of gendered impacts of chemical weapons, of crimes against children. All of these things are examples of how we've tried to shape our approach in light of what we're hearing. And if we go on to the next slide, I think it's really obvious that there are massive challenges involved in this process. For a start, it's really resource intensive. We've been doing most of it with in-person consultations, and that's a really important component given the traumatic nature of the subject. But how do we try to reach greater and greater segments of the population. So that leads us to the scalability question. And now with changed circumstances in Syria, this opens up a whole new discussion about how to reach affected communities that have had no engagement with justice actors, either nationally or internationally up until now. It's complicated to extract the operational information from this vast body of input that we're receiving. How do we take it and make it meaningful for the design of justice? Knowing how to even have the conversation, what questions do we put on the table, what's important to ask, how do we reach marginalised groups, and how do we keep affected communities informed about what we are doing in response to the input that they've received. And I would say, if we go to the, well, actually, no, stay on that slide. I mentioned the changed circumstances in Syria, and I think it really underscores the importance of this process right now, because we know we need a Syrian-owned and led justice process, but how does the Syrian community have ownership of this? We hear concerns about fragmented consultations going on in Syria, concerns that the affected community isn't sufficiently able to access them. There's even consultation fatigue. There's a lack of a strategic overview of how do we engage with victims and survivors. So I think what I really want to finish with is the idea that maybe now is the time for us to collectively think about how technology could be an amplifier or enabler in this process. We certainly don't have the answer at the IIIM. We have a lot of thoughts based on the experience that we've had so far. And my purpose today is really to throw this question out and hopefully whet our collective appetite for a bit more engagement and thinking on how we go about using this. But I think, yeah, we can in Q&A talk a little bit about some of the ideas, but really welcome your engagement on that topic.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. Fantastic presentation. Appreciate the slides as well. It's interesting for me that the presenters are posing questions to the audience, but I think that's probably indicative of what kind of space that we're in, human rights investigations and innovation. But there's a lot of open questions that we should try to answer, and I do hope that they come out in the discussion. And these questions are continually asked because they need to be answered and then answered again with the next iteration and answered again. Thank you. I won't try to sum up your remarks. I wouldn't do them justice. I will just quickly move on then to the next speaker, who's to my right, Sun Kim. She's a legal advisor with us in the accountability, what we call accountability and judicial cooperation section. So thanks for joining, Sun, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'd like to introduce myself by saying I've been here only for a few months, and I'm starting up a new section called the Accountability and Judicial Cooperation section in the branch. And my vision for this section is really twofold. One is to pursue avenues of accountability, and we can talk about what that means. And the second is to enhance judicial cooperation. So what we see as a trend, I would say at least in the last decade, perhaps even before that, for years with the Syrian conflict, there was so much impasse at the UN level that the GA became very creative and created the IIIM Syria. And I think since the establishment of the IIIM Syria, we have Human Rights Council establishing the IIM. We have Security Council establishing UNITAD. And we've also seen a trend here with Human Rights Council in the last, I would say, decade, where there's increasing use in the resolution of language that really points to accountability. So not only does it mandate these investigative bodies to collect and preserve information, but there's language in there, quote, maximize admissibility in legal proceedings, identify perpetrators under international criminal responsibility or command responsibility. And that kind of language given by member states in the council to these investigative bodies, to me, meant that there's a little bit of a shift, and it's going outside the normal realm of what were traditional just human rights monitoring reports to reports where the underlying information that was collected would indeed be used for accountability processes. And so my definition of accountability is broad. I think we've always thought of it, as Michelle pointed out, under very traditional international criminal law accountability processes. And those are very, very limited. And we see now this proliferation in many jurisdictions mainly in Western Europe, but not only in Western Europe, of the use of universal jurisdiction, looking at different types of accountability in the individual criminal lens. But I think there's also opportunities for, let's say, jurisdictions that allow civil cases for monetary damages, for other human rights sanctions regimes. And we can have a discussion during the Q&A about what else we identify under the label accountability. The second part of that is investigative bodies, the mechanisms spend so much time, energy collecting information. What do we do with that? What we don't want is a fraction of that information to be reflected in a report, the rest of it archived and inaccessible. What I want is this information to be live, more or less. I want jurisdictions to be able to access it. I want that judicial cooperation pathway to be efficient, to be timely, to be actionable, and to increase those processes. So that's what I'm here to do. My section is going to be more human-powered innovation rather than tech-powered innovation. But I think with all technology, I mean, I'm from the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. For me, the framework of the question also always has to be put, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And is there an appropriate tech solution? And it shouldn't be the reverse. So I think that that's where maybe Il Young and other colleagues will talk about, Hadi, we'll talk about if you have an archive of millions and millions of pieces of social media, how does maybe an investigative judge in a jurisdiction sift through that and find the relevant information? And that's what this section is really here to support for all of the current operational investigative bodies and those archives that are closed. For all of the investigative bodies that have closed, OHCHR is the custodian of those archives. And so those requests for judicial cooperation will come to this section. And I think I will stop there. Hopefully we can have a robust discussion on how this can all work.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Wow, so much to discuss. We're loading up our short half hour afterwards with many very interesting questions. Thank you for putting that forward. We are running towards the end of our dynamic panel. I've got next on the list Chris West, who is the roster manager at JRR, one of the partners that was mentioned by Alex early on that we work closely with. Thank you for joining us, Chris. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel at the Human Rights Summit. For those of you who may not know much about us, at JRR, we partner with international, national and civil society actors by providing them with prompt, impartial and professional expertise tailored to the context to investigate international crimes and serious human rights violations and to promote the rights and access to justice of victims and survivors. Next slide, please. In my role, I oversee our roster of over 750 justice and human rights experts who we deploy to these partners across the globe. The JRR roster is gender and geographically balanced with a broad range of expertise to be able to respond to the various requests that we receive. Next slide, please. But today I want to, in kind of keeping with the themes of the past couple of days, I want to focus on one aspect of our roster, our digital and technological expertise. This is an area that we started directly focusing on and growing back in 2019 in response to the growing needs of our partners and the wider international community. Now, as you see, we have 23 experts who work at the intersection of technology and human rights and whose expertise covers the stages that investigation teams will go through in their approach to data and information, whether that's gathering, analysis, storage, security, archiving, whilst remaining focused on the integration of this into the wider investigation strategy. Next slide, please. It's apparent that this is becoming an increasing need as we're hearing today, as we continue to advance into an ever more digitalized world. Over just the past 3 years, we have seen a significant increase in the number of deployments of this types of expertise, whether this is open source investigators in Ukraine, digital forensics and facial imagery in the Maldives, or data management in Iraq. In discussions that we have with our partners, the subject of digital expertise is regularly raised, and the inquiries that JRR receives reflect not only the importance of this work, but the gap between the current needs and the existing capacity within those organizations. I want to take this opportunity to provide an example of how digital and technological experts can have a significant impact on the work of international investigation teams. Justice Rapid Response was approached by OHCHR with a request for an information management officer with expertise on evidence management and the use of e-discovery software to support the fact-finding mission on Iran. Between October 2023 and April 2024, the expert established an information management structure that ensured that all the evidence gathered by the fact-finding mission was efficiently organised and preserved in the relevant database, including all the material that was then referenced in the March 2024 report to the Human Rights Council. This structure also improved things such as the chain of custody process, as well as the integrity of the information. The expert integrated the gender and child rights considerations that were previously mentioned into their work by ensuring the disaggregation of information by gender and age, as well as by collecting and analysing open source information in a way that protected vulnerable witnesses, including women, LGBTQI+ persons, and children. As is also often the case, the expert wore many hats, and the expert therefore assisted also with working on the collecting, authenticating, and verifying OSINT, as well as with the factual and legal analysis of the collected material. But this work, as we're hearing, only has impact if it does not take place in a silo, and that the expertise is integrated into the wider investigation team. As such, as part of the deployment, the expert transferred skills to fellow team members, including investigators and report drafters, on open source investigations, evidence collection protocols, and case management methods. The timing of this deployment was relevant as the organisation and preservation of materials was also important for the fact-finding mission's renewed mandate, under which the preservation of evidence was prioritised. In fact, the leadership of the fact-finding mission stated the contribution of the JRR expertise had a significant impact on the mission's reports and the ability to uphold higher standards of material preservation. Illustrating these significant contributions, after the end of the deployment, OHCHR actually retained the expert in the same position. And this is just one example of how this specialised expertise can be integrated into existing investigation teams to advance work on how information is managed, analysed, and utilised. In parallel to these deployments, JRR has partnered with the Institute of International Criminal Investigations and the Human Rights Center at the University of Berkeley, California, to develop a project focused on strengthening accountability in the digital era. This project aims to harness the full potential of digital technology to advance accountability for international crime and grave human rights violations by making the provision of digital investigative experts, technological tools, guidance, and capacity building available to a large and diverse group of partners. Next slide, please. This project will bring together the strengths of these three organisations around 5 main activities. Digital needs mapping, the development of a network of key organisations working in the space, the bolstering of the deployable expertise, contributing towards guidance, policies and best practice, and building global capacity. Looking ahead, we hope to be able to implement these activities to make a substantial contribution to the integration of digital investigative expertise into accountability processes, to strengthen the collaboration between key actors, to build the capacity of our partners around the world, and contribute to the development of practical guidance and policies across the sector. However, our capacity to advance and be able to fully implement these activities does remain subject to receiving support from more partners who wish to engage in this work. Final slide, please. As mentioned by some other people already on the panel, it's clear now that we cannot ignore these challenges today, and that having expertise in the field of digital investigations is now essential to being part of any investigation process. And I'd be delighted to continue discussions on the project, the digital expertise that I mentioned, and JRR more widely with anyone who'd be interested in learning more. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you very, very much. And participants, colleagues, I hope you're jotting down your questions and your comments and your insights on what you're hearing today, because it's very, very rich so far. We have a lot of fodder. And we've, of course, saved one of our best speakers for last. Il-Young Hong, she leads the branch's information systems and digital support section, which is obviously playing a very key role in this space. So Il-Young, the floor is yours.
A lot of pressure. The best. Yeah, my name is Il-Young. I work for Human Rights Inquiries branch of OHCHR, working with Beatrice, Alex, and Son, and other colleagues in the room. And my role in the branch is supporting human rights investigation teams commonly called the fact-finding mission, commission of inquiries, and other teams that has been created by the High Commissioner. So my role is mainly focusing on digital support. It is not only system or solutions, but also expertise support. So the next slide, please. So in terms of innovation, what we are talking about, what drives us in terms of innovation when we are supporting our innovation is basically to support the decisions and the directions made by the investigation team. That was mentioned by Alex and also Son partially, and also Giuseppe here. And that is nowadays there are a lot of challenges in investigation, and our investigation teams are in a very, very difficult status because of many things. Basically, they are given in a very, very short time frame to operationalize their work and rapidly going there and collect information and report it very shortly. And their lifespan is not really big. It is commonly like only 1 year or 2 years, and then they are extended if necessary, meaning they are almost doing a sprint. And processing a lot of information from diverse sources is such a big challenge for them under the pressure of cybersecurity issues and protection of witness, all these things. So still, there is a high expectation. You are fact-finding missions will be providing trustworthy information, and then they can be relied on in judicial process further beyond the lifespan of investigation. And that expectation gives the innovation required in their processes. So what we do in the innovation, actually, there are 3 forces. It's very, very common when you think of how we innovate anything: infrastructure, digital solutions, and expertise and procedure. And our team is integrating all this in one place. So we have been building infrastructure for investigation teams. They have not been equipped so far, yeah. And then also expertise. When we think of providing solutions, it will not work. A new mobile phone, you still need to learn. And when investigation is in a very short time frame to operationalize and to learn it, it's going to be very much difficult. So we try to simplify, streamline as much as possible, and also integrate the expertise support within the team directly. And then procedure should be very much simple to digest. So that's what we are trying to do in our innovation. And the last slide. So one of the good examples is actually Bangladesh investigation that happened last year. We collected massive information from massive sources, including medical records, CCTVs, drone footages, submissions of information from really huge number of sources, and also collected from witnesses directly from the field. And we integrated this information. 90% of this information was multimedia. Traditionally, this multimedia information is very difficult to digest because listening, watching, and one by one reviewing this information will take ages. But however, we managed to process this information with the AI-powered technologies, and in addition to that, more sophisticated technologies throughout our newly deployed platforms, and we visualize this information very effectively. That was reflected in the report. And of course, specialists expertise have been embedded, integrating together with this technology. So our goal is making sustainable and make it achievable and recovery in any investigation that we roll out. Of course, the biggest challenge here is actually always the resource issue. And because of that, we do a lot of partnership. It's not limited to our own JLR, as Chris mentioned, and also other institutions who are in this room too, and also more academia and also NGOs, also national institutions. So we can make it together, and we will continue. Thank you very much. I finished my presentation.
Thank you very, very much. Excellent. Appreciate really all the panelists. You guys have not only been incredibly substantial, given so much topics, themes, elements for discussion in the room, but you've also been very timely. So we are exactly on time. We have about a half an hour left where we can open up the floor and hopefully some good exchanges on it. I mentioned earlier that we're hoping, not only to have a Q&A as such, but that doesn't mean you should be afraid in any way to ask questions. If you have questions of the panelists, please feel free to do so. And panelists, if you have questions for each other, please also feel free to bring those to the floor. Proposals, ideas, your own innovations, maybe that you're working on where you are. It's now really, we're going to make it a free for all, as it were. I don't know if Beatrice, if you want to do anything initially to kick us off, I would be happy to
No,
give you the
I would
floor,
be
but-
so embarrassed. So many experts around the table. No, I'm
understand.
very thankful that we have all these very knowledgeable
Exactly,
colleagues
yes.
presenting. No.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Anna, I don't know how anything is coming in on the chat just yet, on the Q&A. Okay, so light up the chat thing if you would like to. Does anybody here in the room have an initial question they wanna start with? Patty? Excellent. Floor is yours.
Can you?
And introduce yourself, please, if you would.
Our technology is not that advanced.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It's very informative, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. My name is Hadi, and I'm the managing director of a civil society organization called Mnemonic. We're based in Berlin, and we build archives, digital archives that investigate international crimes. One of the questions that I have is for you, Giuseppe, because especially when it comes to situations related to the investigations that you are conducting related to the occupied territory of Palestine, East Jerusalem, and Israel, we have seen a very strong use of autonomous weapons and automation and machine learning to automate and identify targets that scaled up attacks against civilians and civilian objects. And I would like to ask, how are you investigating these kind of algorithms that are being used in this situation? Thank you.
I don't necessarily want to put you on the spot with this sort of direct thing, but I did
Not
actually say it was a
necessary.
free for all. So if you're okay answering, otherwise.
No, I am okay. We are not investigating. And we are not investigating, not because we don't believe that is a worthwhile area of investigation, is just because this area, like other areas of this conflict or any other conflict, would deserve a special attention. Now, I am basically a manager, and as you know, any manager will tell you, you give me the money, I do whatever you ask me to do. The reality is that our mandate is already so broad and so extensive. We have to make very painful. We have to take very painful decisions. We have to decide that this we can do, and this we should do, and this we cannot do, and we are not going to do. That area of investigation will require very specialized expertise, which is not just the investigative expertise, but just to plan to organize an investigation in that direction, you will need somebody who is able to tell you where to look and what to look. Again, it's not just this area that we are very much aware of and we cannot cover. There are many other areas that are exactly in the same situation. Be careful, don't give ideas to the Human Rights Council, because they might come up with new requests. You might be aware, for instance, that some of the requests of the Human Rights Council done in the last few years, we were not able to implement, simply because let's not get into the self-inflicting pain, but in the current climate, with the liquidity crisis, with the organization such a, you should go and look outside the UN if that is a possible solution. And maybe there would be other entities, other bodies will be able to look at that specific.
And if there are other bodies that look at that, they can, of course, give their findings to the investigation, and they can assess that like they assess other sources.
We know how you work.
Thank you, Joseph.
Can
Thank you.
Of course.
Can I just add?
And then.
Yeah.
Lando.
Okay, I just wanted to add one thing to that, Hadi. 10 years ago, I went to a conference at Stanford about artificial intelligence and human rights, and one of the most robust and exciting panels was the use of AI in the military. And there were representatives from technology companies and the Department of Defense. And I think that this is a problem that we have been thinking, I'm talking with an IHL hat here, that we've been thinking about and trying to work on for a very, very long time. So just on the accountability side, I want to say that just because targeting decisions or information is fed into an automated system doesn't mean that there isn't a human at the end of that system, and the IHL still applies. And so I think we can't let go of our international legal framework and our international law obligations when we decide to put decision-making into autonomous systems. And so just on the accountability side, let's always keep that in mind.
Excellent. Thanks for that reminder. Very good. Sam?
Yes, thank you. My name is Samuel from Justice Rapid Response. So, two questions for Fred and you as well. So, can you tell me, maybe in non-technical terms, how do you use artificial intelligence today? What kind of use case you have? And the extension of that question is two things. Increasingly, organizations and companies can create their own AI model, train on their own data. Is that the future of what you are looking at to make it safer and potentially increase the number of usage that we can do? That's the first thing. And the third element, and anybody can comment here, what we saw at the level of the civil society organizations in particular is that when they start a documentation projects, they are asking themselves, which tool should I use? What is safe? Who is guaranteeing that the tool is going to be updated for another 10 years and not stop because it's commercially not viable, etc. So I think there's probably a need at some stage to have not a vetting process, but some sort of vetting process for tools that are produced so that we know it's reliable and safe for, in particular, civil society organizations to use. So it's a multi-layered question, and sorry.
An excellent question. Indeed, one that we do discuss at length inside the branch. So very good for our work. Eventually, I'll give you the first crack at it. And then
Yeah, sure. As far as how we use AI at the moment, to be honest with you, we don't. It's very much an R&D process. We're very, very aware of the drawbacks of the different models. There is a very big concern is that we do not know what the different boundaries are for the different models because they're completely opaque. We have no idea of the training data that they've been trained on, which if you look at all the stats, especially for the bigger companies, runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars, which to kind of segue into your second part is probably a reason why we'd never train our own model because we just don't have that sort of money. But it is a big concern that a lot of these models are very powerful. We do test them in different ideas and different scenarios that we think they might be useful, but there's still a very high degree of hallucination. Some people are going to say to you, well, that's because you've not quite crafted your prompts right. That's not the point. The big concern that we have is repeatability. If I ask you to summarize this particular set of data around this particular incident and give me citations for it, I want it to be nearly identical if I do that now and if I do it in 2 weeks' time. Bearing in mind, I haven't tampered with the data in between that period. And this is the issue that we have at the moment, is that there are always nuances. And when you're talking about large reports that are being spat out from the data sets you've got, it still takes someone to go through that and kind of verify that what's spat out's right. Now, does that save time? Of course it saves time. You know, you don't have to type the whole thing up, but there's always, as far as the testing we've done so far, you're always going to have that human element that's going to have to make sure that it's right, especially when you're dealing with topics that are so serious.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? How about confidential information? I assume we're not giving an AI access to your information.
Well, this is the other issue, is that whatever you do run, at least from our perspective, will never be in the cloud. Because it's just the way that information is harvested, the way that it's used to train things. We, in particular, have a very, very high cybersecurity threshold as to what goes out where. And to be honest with you, if we restrict the use of tools like Google within our organization, the AIs are definitely not going to see a shred of our information in a cloud-based sense. So, but the beauty is that there are smaller models now. You know, I believe Meta came out with a model not too long ago that you can run on a laptop. So you don't necessarily need to have supercomputers to actually utilize some of that technology. The question is just, what is the best way to utilize that to facilitate part of your workflow? As opposed to trying to think that it's like I was saying earlier, it's a one-shot wonder that it fixes all your problems. Chances are, if you can really identify within your workflow and within your issue stack, as part of your investigation, where it would be most effective, that's kind of what we're trying to figure out ourselves at the moment.
Good point. I don't know if you want to come in on this or not.
Well, I'm not sure I can add much, but maybe just a few comments. I personally will not use any artificial intelligence module unless there is one that has been properly trained and fed with the right algorithm. Our experience in using AI for some menial tasks has been not very exciting, and you know, we have seen, we have even seen the famous hallucinations that you know we were talking about. As of what tools you should use, I think our colleagues are better placed. I think that you know the evolution is such that in 2-3 years, the tools that we are using today will not be up to speed. At the time, I'm thinking about you know previous work that I have done 10 years ago, and just to say, you know, we were at that time we were using Lotus Notes to exchange messages, and today Lotus Notes that does not exist anymore. Is not even compatible with current standards. So you will always need somebody to translate that information and make it relevant today.
I remember Lotus Notes.
It is not that long ago.
Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, this conversation prompts me to just emphasize one of the points coming out of the presentation that I made about, I mean, it's really an observation that up until now, I think our conversation about the integration of tech and digital approaches, AI, in the human rights or accountability space has really largely focused on how we use it for documentation, how we use it for archiving, that sort of thing. So I think what I'm really inviting is us to broaden up our focus and think about how some of these new technologies might help us on things like community consultation, collective decision-making, specifically to inform transitional justice priorities. And I think the issue of AI is really interesting in this context because, you know, I think our experience is the same as IIMM. But if you were thinking about now this sort of new challenge, now that we've changed our mindset, we're committed to integrating victim survivor priorities to shape justice, we have this massive challenge of how do you consult whole communities of people that are really voluminous, complex, diverse. The input would be so huge. Is there a role for artificial intelligence in helping to synthesize input and coming up with strategic priorities for a justice process? And I think with all of the caveats, which I think are really valid around how much can we trust it, you know, what are the biases, the advantage of using it in a context like that would be the opportunity to go back to the community and say, how does this sound? Give us your further input. You can, it could be an ongoing discussion until there was a consensus around, okay, this is what we go with.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very good plan. I had a couple hands up. Okay, Ilyong, you're next. Hey, Anna, do we have any questions coming in yet? Colleagues online, please feel free to use the Q&A. No, don't hesitate. We're waiting for your questions. Ilyong.
Thank you. I will be short. I see a lot of people also want to. Actually, in fact, we use AI technology in our investigations. It's quite embedded in more or less in any digital forensics tools nowadays. And for example, but it's not, as a friend mentioned, it's not used to decide what is actually the fact. It is more toward the narrow down to the relevant material. As an example, if we are analyzing satellite imageries, most of the case, or in many cases, we would want to know what is the difference after the massive attack over certain locations and before. And knowing or analyzing all the information manually would take a lot of time. But using AI technology, we would be able to narrow down the scope much. And this way, it's just one of the examples. We would utilize the AI and identify most relevant material. Another example would be face detections. If we know already a range of faces that is relevant to the cases or our investigations, from massive information, we talked about 90% material collected in Bangladesh was actually multimedia, right? And in this case, to identify a certain location without metadata, location or object or faces, we would utilize actually actively AI technology that can narrow down the scope. Of course, there is a human expertise going after to verify and check if it is factual thing matching to the account of witnesses, so that is corroborated by other expertise. However, it does not mean we are ignoring AI technology. And in terms of using how we can actually be open to using generative different case. Generative AI is not all about AI. So we should differentiate a little bit in between. However, in terms of using AI technology, it is not limited in our investigation. We are actually using it. And also in terms of cybersecurity, we talked about cybersecurity is a huge threat. And the cybersecurity nowadays is not only a signature in the malware. It is also based on AI technology to detect a certain pattern. So it is really widely used. However, with precaution, and there is ethical. Actually, in UN, we have entity analyzing, what is the ethical use of AI technology in investigation together with Interpol. I will send out UNICRI's reference about their new researches that we actually collaborate quite well, and they provide a list of tools utilizing AIs, and they verify and make recommendations too. So yeah, just for us to be aware, it's not ignored, it is also integrated, but with quite a precaution to use it ethically.
Very good. So it is being integrated. I see a couple hands over here. Let's go first with Josh and then the colleague.
You want to come close to the table so I can hear you.
Introduce yourself.
Please.
Thanks, Josh Lyons. I'm very curious to ask the colleagues if if we've had any opportunity to engage in sort of a more structured historical assessment of some iconic past investigations that were entirely analog, to try and critically evaluate to what extent the process of those investigations or the findings of the investigations or the outcomes would have been meaningfully changed had all of these beautiful, amazing technologies that we have now been available at the time. Because my speaking as a technology human rights person, my sense is that the technology changes the way we do our work in ways that we're not really aware of, and it doesn't change things the way we think it does. And really, I think in some ways that it's really only by going back in time and evaluating these iconic analog investigative cases where we have the opportunity to be really self-critical about what's this technology really doing for us? Is it really helping? And is it helping in the ways that we expect? And is it worth the investment? And how do we manage and evaluate all of the investments that we're doing now?
Seems like a very fair question. It touches also on what Sam was saying earlier is, do we have a problem that we then want to bring in tech to solve? Or what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this issue? I think that's what you're saying. If we go back and look, did we have problems back then that could have been solved by tech? I don't know if anybody who has more expertise in this than myself, which is probably the entire room, want to respond to Josh's question. Yeah.
I mean, I haven't done an audit of a historical investigation and seen, was it better then or can it be better now? But really specific examples of where technology can help, where there is an identified problem. So there's an identified problem with the just use of open source material in investigations. Everybody with the mobile phone, taking pictures, taking videos, posting it online. When you have millions and millions of pieces of social media evidence and you want to do something very simply like, is there a way technology can help you deduplicate a million videos and group them into perhaps location, date, actor together? That, perfect. Because that would take people hours and hours and hours to sift through all of that, look at. Then, as Fred was saying, on the back end of that, so now you have the grouping and that's done through technology. You do have analysts, you have human innovation. So you have people who sit there and look at the grouping of those videos and can confirm it and further analyze it. The other thing that's helped me quite a bit is I only know 3 languages. So I've worked in country situations where I don't know the language, and there's been automatic transcription and translation of video and text from the language that is the original document or the original video into a language that I can read or speak. And so that's been incredibly helpful, because otherwise I would have had to hire, find somebody, hire them, which we can't do because there's no money in the UN. So these are ways in which, identify the problem. What is it that we have? How can we solve it? Is there a tech solution for that? Keeping in mind data privacy, ethics, et cetera, et cetera.
Nicely answered. Thank you. Colleague here, you want to come in first?
I will actually just jump in on that. I can't resist because I feel like I have the rough experiment that you have in mind, because I spent many years working on prosecutions for the Yugoslav War Crimes Tribunal, which was totally before the digital age in terms of evidence, well, mostly before the digital age, and now on Syria, which was really one of the first conflicts where we had this massive amount of digital evidence. And it's a really interesting question, which I'll have to reflect on further. But I mean, of course, I think the big hope was the digital technologies would allow us to work faster. One of the big complaints of the ad hoc courts and tribunals, even the ICC these days, is just the length of time it takes to prepare the cases and to present them in court. So ideally, the new technology would be allowing us to go faster. I think that's still a work in progress, to be honest, based on the experience of IIIM. There are some technologies that we've been able to integrate, our ability to, especially when it comes to searching through the repository, to identify quickly specific types of material, and as Sam was saying, to group things for analytical purposes. So you start to see some really promising examples of that. But on the whole, our methodologies really still have been quite traditional, with witness statements and manual review of most of what we do. So I think there's a lot there. I think the other thing that comes to mind is technology helping us to try to access those marginalized groups who, in traditional investigations don't really surface, because investigators don't immediately go to the places where women are or where children are. Whereas the digital material, the fact that you've got social media sources, you can potentially access a much wider range of affected victims and survivors, but only if you're looking at how technology is used by those groups and accounting for the biases in the technology itself. So I think it's a work in progress to see the benefits that could be reaped.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Michelle. Yeah, I think that is the idea, that we can work a bit faster. Okay, Chris, then I promise.
Mine's super quick, but I was on a very basic level, just the advanced technology and the impact it's had on communications. I think I haven't got the exact data in front of me, but over the past 5 years, when these 40 to 45% of our deployments are now done remotely, we're able to support that's civil society organisations, international bodies around the world for work that has been very securely vetted, and that sort of thing that can be done safely and securely from here in Geneva or from wherever the expert happens to be around the world. So just the accessibility of expertise without, I think Chevy was saying about the access to country situations that you just didn't have. You can have some levels of access to be able to get extra information just through the advances in communication technology, if nothing else.
Yeah. Very good point. Thank you very much. The gentleman first and then the next one. Please introduce yourself. Come to the microphone. Yeah.
Pass this over.
And again, just say this does not have to be a Q&A, but one after the other, but please respond to each other's comments if you like.
Hi, my name is Evan Welber Falcon. I am an associate human rights officer with the Human Rights Council branch. And I just have a general question for the panelists, sort of building off of Hadi's question related to autonomous weapons. So how do your teams investigate crimes involving the use of new technologies like AI or autonomous weapons, where any successful prosecution might require innovative or untested legal theories? Do you shape investigations around anticipated judicial interpretations, or do you proceed without a fixed theory? And if so, how do you keep the investigation effective when the law is still evolving?
Very much open the floor to any people who have worked on investigations yourself, if you'd like to respond to that. And I think any members of the panel could also do so. But do you have a similar, you want to add a question to that, and then I'll take whoever wants to respond.
Yeah, so actually, my question is that, well, just to introduce myself, hi, I'm Sophia. I was a legal consultant with the Met section, and I was working with them, assisting the Met section on this AI tool that pulls in open source data in verification. And I was brought in as a human or the legal element. I was brought in as a legal consultant to help like verify the data, the open source data on attacks against human rights offenders. So while working on this, there are just some things that come up to me. Because like I was working on this like categorization, like groupings, like verification of dates, time, place, like where this happened and what they're doing and what they're and what kind of human rights offenders they are. And I was wondering, like, with all this data that I was verifying, like, what is the point of this later on? Like, how do we analyze all this data? And I was wondering if we should already think of the intention, like at the start, at the beginning, like, are we looking at this data as early warning signs? Are we looking at this data from what perspective? And I was just wondering if we should already ask these perspectives before we even collect all this data, rather than, I mean, I understand what Giuseppe was also saying earlier about like, we collect all this data now and we analyze later. But in terms of like developing an AI tool with the office, I was wondering if we already have to have these intentions in mind. Like, why are we collecting this data? And what are we going to do with this later? So there.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think for the specific investigations, there will be an answer, but it comes out of the mandate, the resolution passed by the council typically, and they have in mind that they wanted to propose a report. And then we kind of look at Sun and say, we have all this information, now make it available to accountability mechanisms globally. So I think for our investigations, it's kind of answered by that, let's say, finite process. But I think for the office more generally, it's a very good question to ask. We have things like early warning when we have offices, regional offices that are looking at human rights violations that might bubble up through the type of analysis that you're looking for. So I hope they are very much asking that question before they put a process into motion. But it's very good, and I see Nicola will probably want to come in on this. But just before I give it to you, Nicola, you want to make on the accountability question?
I'm biased, but I'll say we should always be collecting data, whether it's open source digital data or whether it's a witness interview. We should always be collecting with the view that, hey, can I use this in court someday? That's my standard, and that's what I would encourage. And to Evan's question, it's not, the legal frameworks haven't changed. We're all bound by the same laws of war. There's an updated commentary to the Fourth Geneva Convention that came out recently, but we're all bound by the same laws. Whether you use a musket or whether you use a drone that's operated by some autonomous weapon system, the laws remain the same. So the use of that technology doesn't necessarily drive the investigation. It's you're doing the investigation, verifying the facts, applying the facts to the law, and then there's an opportunity there in looking at who's using this technology for what. If you're a IHL, a legal advisor in your own military, there's an opportunity there for you to advise the military on that. But it's really about advice. And then on the open source stuff, I think it's really important on the back end is to see the methodology. So I want to see, how was that data collected? How was that metadata preserved? Where was it stored? I want to see all of that methodology so it can stand up in court someday.
Very good. Thank you. And other uses as well. I mean, Sun is particularly focused on judicial accountability, but there are many other types of accountability where this information can be used. We had a little scare there. We thought we were going to have to leave the room, but we are okay to continue. But we are also up against time, so if you need to leave, please feel free to do so. But I am certainly enjoying this discussion very much and would like to keep it going for those of you who can stay around. Nicola, you have the floor. And
just I want to react. I think it involved in the.
Can you?
She's referring to the.
Introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm Nicola Fazel. I'm the Innovation Analytics Hub, Human Rights Statistics team. And the team is responsible for the creation of global human rights indicators, and one of the indicators about attacks against human rights defenders. So I think the objective of that is definitely to improve protections of human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists. We work with UNESCO, with ILO. We work with many international NGOs. We work with all national human rights institutions to collect this kind of data. I think we limited resources, but there's been significant progress. Now you can actually, if you check human rights count on the OHCHR website, you will see for all countries in the world what's happening on the front of attacks against human rights defenders. So this was maybe developed after some of the work that you did. I also want just to say about we're also the custodian of conflict-related death indicators. And this reminds me of many years ago for Syria, and where we were in situations where actually colleagues came to see us and say, we would like to know how many people are being killed in Syria. There were numbers, figures coming from very different parts, and the office, the human rights committee, was trying to come with a number. And there was no other solution than to use tech, of course, but also to use, I think, what the UN is convening and establishing collaboration with different data providers. But the numbers that were through the use of tech, the OHCHR was able to produce a number was actually much higher than all the numbers that had been produced by different entities. But we had to use tech to do this record linkage between those different sources. And we had to use tech. It took a few years before maybe there was maybe more openness in this kind of analysis, because you know that this is only what is being documented. It's very limited. We know that the true are much higher. And there was one of the Roundtable, someone from Human Rights Data Analysis Group was working in many conflict situations, or essentially post-conflict situations, but were able to produce, they use AI to clean those lists coming from different sources, and they use statistical techniques to estimate true figures, which are more than the double that what was in our records. So I think that this is already all. I think these kind of things can be done faster, but more systematically in different contexts. But I think they will again issues of capacity.
Thank you very much. The casualty recording issues around our investigations are present, and your example of the use case of using tech to help with that process is very pertinent. Thank you, Nicola. I have Sam, and then sorry, I actually said William. So Will. Actually, Andrew, you'll forgive me.
Well, I just wanted to add a bit in on the collections piece. The one thing to just bear in mind, I think there's a slight deviation between if you're dealing with something that was historical where everyone's kind of gathered everything that happened at the time, and you're going around trying to find people that you think can give you information that's going to be useful, and then dealing with a live and evolving conflict area where your collections are basically daily, because you have to gather as much as you can about what happened that day. Because if it's online, it's ephemeral. So it might be that today, by Friday, it's gone. And the worst thing that we always have is that if you don't gather it when it's fresh, how much opportunity is there for the perpetrators to go and meddle with it before you can collect it? So it's actually changed over time. And those are the things that I think really do drive this whole thing about, should I collect it now, or is it useful now, or is it? Because bear in mind, what you're collecting is not just evidence. A lot of it's information that at a later point, you look back and you go, okay, so this town has been bombed, 100 people killed, great. What was this? But what was the scenario around that? What was the build up to it? And then you land up with all the data you collected for the week before that, everything after it. And that's how you then land up building the storyline around it. Whereas if you only gathered the information on that day of the event, you don't have the context, you see. So there's a lot more to it than just gathering evidence.
Very good point. I also am conscious that I'm standing or sitting between you and lunch, so maybe we won't just keep this going on forever, but there's a few floors that we have, I think, our hands on the floor. Will, and then Sam.
Yeah, I'm Will, I'm from the Australian Mission. I'll keep my question relatively short. It goes to information integrity. We've had speakers over the last couple of days, one that I remember particularly, who talked a lot about challenges with information integrity because of AI slop and increasingly harder to pick. I mean, I remember seeing things on Twitter 5 years ago and you could easily pick it. Nowadays, it looks more realistic. So this question isn't really directed at anyone in particular, just reflections around information integrity. Is this a newer challenge? Is it getting harder? Without revealing trade secrets, how is verification? Is it human verification? Is it becoming harder to do human verification? Is there a role for technology in information, ensuring information integrity?
As a methodology person, I have answers, but I want to give it to the floor to somebody else. And if anybody,
yes, no, it is getting more prevalent, the phenomenon that you have mentioned. However, there are always ways to verify information, and we would verify any information that we receive, not just information we suspect might be compromised. You don't need I mean, I don't know if there is any specific technologically advanced tool to do so, but just, classical triangulation. Is this information coming from a source that is already known to us, not known to us, reliable, less reliable? AI, I don't think it's, any imagery, video is easily detectable. When it is that, I think the challenge is not AI produce content. The challenge is when somebody pretends that an event has happened in a particular place and you discover that no, it does not happen in that particular place. It has happened somewhere else. Or when the context is not clear, and as you know, the same event seen from two different angles might give totally different results. So there is always the possibility to do triangulation. There is a video showing somebody shooting somebody else, and it's broad daylight, the sun is shining, and then you check the weather of that location in that particular day and you discover that it was raining. So there are ways, and it is it's not new. It is new that it's becoming more used for propaganda purposes mainly, but there are so many filters that can be applied, and this is something that it has been done since the start of this new way of doing things. They might come up with one single tool, but as far as we are concerned, I think that there are enough tools, including the ability of the investigator to establish how much a piece of information is genuine or not.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if on the tech side you want to answer that question about video verification as well, or leave it. Yeah.
Yeah, we utilize the AI technology quite recently. The example is when there is actually is a quite recent development in video verification. So deep fakes. It is nowadays the biggest hunter. Yeah, and when we are analyzing it, most of the cases in the past it was human video expert, video forensic analyst would analyze really little by little all the frames. Nowadays, there is a systematic identification of indicators, and then it can provide a certain amount of information. It is likely from the generated AI technology or not, modification of certain areas. Yeah, so it can facilitate.
We did recently something on face recognition with together.
You had the first question. Why don't I give you the last?
Yeah, very short. Just to answer Josh's question about last week, the ICC released their policy on cyber-enabled crime. So they looked at the different core crimes and they sort of described how this could be enabled by cyber attacks. So maybe that's just a reference to your question. The second thing, it's a general comment to build on soon intervention. So what we see as well is that there is a number of countries who have universal jurisdiction in their legislation, but never use it, in particular in the eastern part of Europe. And I think where there is a potential contribution that we could make at JRR is to deploy prosecutors or investigators who have experience in looking at those crimes to work in pair with those prosecutors who never had a chance to work on those things. And in that space, I think there is a whole discussion that we did not have here for good reasons, is all the technology used to do suspect tracking. Because this is probably something that I don't have visibility on this, but this is something, a place where technology is probably very important. It won't be TSURFACE putting that in place, but more that the prosecutors from the countries looking at those technical opportunities to suspect tracking. So that was my comment.
Good comment. Very pertinent to this.
I think Chris wanted to come in.
Yeah, it was just a point before about ways of verification. The one maybe silver lining to all the things that you hear that are terrible is that for every new emerging sort of threat in this sort of area, there are people who are dedicating their time to being experts to deal with that. And that's what I was mentioning in what we have on the roster is we have people who dedicate their job to things like verification. We have facial imagery experts, things like that. So the challenge that we're seeing is that it may be being provide that expertise alongside any technology that's needed to the people who need it in a timely sort of manner. And I think that's where having sessions like this is really, really valuable, because what we want to be able to see is the experts who know how to solve whatever the issue might kind of be are called upon. They're known about by whoever needs it, whether that's the international level or national or the civil society, and that they're paired with the tools that they're going to be able to need. The tools are verified, like Sam was saying about kind of vetted, we know that they kind of work, that they're reliable, that the things like hallucinations are wiped out, all those sorts of things. I think that's maybe an area to look at going forward, is the intersection between the tools, the expertise, and the people who need it for investigation purposes.
Thank you. Very good. Excellent point. I don't see any other hands up. And I guess we didn't actually manage to convince anyone online to put something forward, despite my harangue. Okay. Well, I guess it's just left to me then to thank all of you for participating. And it's been a fantastic discussion, very rich, especially the panelists. A special thanks needs to go also to Il-Young. She was really the mastermind behind putting this whole session together. Really, she did a fantastic job pulling it pulling it all here. I think you'll agree it was pretty, very nice and rich discussion. And in terms of outcomes, we have now the recording, we have taken copious notes. So I believe that we will put a document together that sort of summarizes the findings and some of the initiatives and things that came out, and we'll then try to circulate it to those of you who participated and who have registered. If you registered, we have your email, so then we'll have a way to send it out to you. With that, thank you all very, very much for the participation. Wish you a good rest of the Rights X Summit, and we will see you again at the future, the next event. Take care.